Alright, what is up, fellas? Another JM lecture, third one of not even the year, of just the entire lifespan of JML. I'm glad we could do it. 2022 is the year of big changes and doing things and getting things done. So we're gonna try and run a more structured JM lecture session and time slot. So first one off the rank, fundamentals and the key goals of Smash. We picked this one because most of you guys are in JMLeague right now. Finishing up your first week and gonna be going through your second. Most of you guys are having sets on Friday as well. And so we thought it would be a good way to start off the revive the JM lectures as a whole. So let's get started. Here we go. So who is this fellow? Who's the guy talking? It's Jacob Yap, that's me, or Jyapper. I should have probably included my gamer tag. Look, I've been playing Smash fairly semi-competitively for most of my uni life since I've been here at Monash. Attended almost all of the JM leagues and top 8'd in a couple, except this current one, JML5. Should probably preface it that I'm not a professional. If you guys want professional like coaching or want someone who has the results to really back up their understanding, I know, go talk to Ray Z or like Didi. But I mean, I think it's still a worthwhile way to discuss the game, have a way to critically think instead of just playing sets over and over again. So that's why I helped Connor set up JMLectures. I think it's a great initiative if you want to try and think more about the game and sort of internalize what we do. All right, so pop quiz. If you want to chuck it in potty text, I'll open that up. What is the most important goal in competitive Smash? Here we go. Oh, I think I was third in JML4 Swiss. I also won some online things. But yeah, just having fun. Yeah, that's pretty good. I said competitive Smash. So kill people, yeah, it's pretty good. Anything else? Fellas are typing. You guys on YouTube can't see that yet. Embarrass your opponent, banning FD, disrespect, all pretty close answers. The actual goal is winning. Alright, so I mean like that's the only way you advance up into bracket. You can take one loss, but you still need to win a bunch. And that's why we're trying to play the game as optimally as possible. We want to win the game. But I mean, beggars the question, how do we win? Just grab my microphone instead of my water bottle. What a classic. Alright, so we need fundamentals really. And the dictionary definition from the fighting game glossary is essentially basic set of skills that work in almost every fighting game. And this line right here is really key. So good fundamentals are the bedrock of a solid player, and once you have enough practice, you can transfer these skills between games, even if the systems are very different. And I love a good dictionary definition because I guess it holds the consensus of a lot of different people. And I think that's what people originally think of what fundamentals are. But what's interesting is the way that they say these include. And when I was doing this JM lecture and doing some research for it, I was trying to find a definitive list. And so maybe you guys can help me out here. And again, some more audience participation. What are examples of the fundies you know or have heard of? All right, chuck them in. I'm not sure, Connor. We may have to work on this. I'm gonna exit up, hit the escape button, and we're gonna do some live typing. Let's see if this works. All right, chuck them down. Spacing, footsies, run back F smash in neutral. Yeah, I guess you can say bait and punish. Live typing. I know, right? Just like a real lecture. Advantage state. Can we do a poll? No, we're doing a poll right now here. Stage control. Oh, I got some good resources for stage control. I know a guy. Recovery. Sequences are actually coming up a bit later. Unplugging the opponent's controller. It's a bit dirty. Edge guarding. So there are a bunch, right? And they keep coming. Flowcharts, conditioning, ledge trapping. There's so many. Is this a definitive list? Clearly not, right? Because it's just coming from a biased sample size, and there's still so many to think of in terms of what's important and what isn't. Conversions, wave dashing, landing. I spelled that completely wrong. Conversions, wave landing, or just landing in general. So there are a bunch of different fundamentals, and I'm sure when people were rattling those lists off, you might have come into your head, yeah, that is a fundamental, or no, I don't really think that is a fundamental. So trying to come up with a list isn't the easiest task, right? And that's not the goal of this lecture. I'm not trying to come up with a definitive list either. I'm trying to go back into the main topic, which is how do we win, right? That's the main goal. We want to win, and we try and employ fundamentals to do so. All right. So what exactly does winning mean? All right, and what constitutes a win? One way you could define it is take 3 stocks, or lives as they are colloquially known, off your opponent before your opponent can take 3 stocks off of you. This is a very mechanical definition. The game literally is baked into the mechanics. Once you take a person's 3 stocks, you get the whole game, and you get the pop up. Your opponent starts clapping for you. Get to do your cool win pose, right? And I think we can divide this section up a little bit further. What's interesting is take 3 stocks, right? That's the main point, and that's how we win, right? So what's the most efficient way of taking 3 stocks, right? And so that leads to what you might lay out the general way we play Smash, right? And I've taken a game from JMLeague 5. You may recognize it. Have a look. All right, so we do some bread and butter setups and combos. So classic one, if you're at very low percents, it's just like a down tilt fair as Ike. Ike, also one of the Fundies characters you may have heard of. People say, oh man, learn Ike. He's got great fundamentals. So I guess that's why I've got him here as an example. He's got a good grab at 0%. He can down throw and then do any aerial as long as he reads it properly. So it's a great way to rack up percent. Right? That's the main goal so far, and that's sub goal of winning. Then we move on to consistent neutral wins. At some points, people fall out of your combos, and the next best thing you can do is to keep them in a state of disadvantage, like we were talking about earlier. So things like F tilt here that probably aren't going to kill at 99% unless you're on the ledge. Making sure you mix it up with grabs, throwing out a cheeky A there here and now again, and using your fair to cover all that large stage. And then finally finding a kill move and setup. Here we've got the Ike doing the classic nair into an up air. It's gonna kill you when you're at high enough percent. It combos at a high enough percent, but one of the interesting things is it doesn't work all the time. You can fall out of this percent range if you're too high. So this is the general flowchart of how you'd like to take a stock as efficiently as possible. This isn't taking into account complications such as the link trying to hit you back, or missing your bread and butter setups, or not finding those consistent neutral wins. And so you would use a lot of different things that we would call fundamentals throughout. So bread and butters may be considered a fundamental to you guys. Having consistent neutral wins and constantly keeping in advantage is probably one of the clearest ways of a fundamental, and as well as finding your kill moves and knowing when they kill. But is this word efficiently? That's not exactly correct, because there are still faster ways of killing your opponent. If you can take your stock at 0%, that'd be great. And so there's some room for variance, obviously. This is the same set where our Link hero is able to kill Ike. Have a guess what percent he dies at. That's right, it's 54%. So, I mean, he just loses his stock, and it's a very efficient way. You don't even have to play neutral, right, if you just find that kill. That's great. Here's another one. This is one of our best Meta Knights in JMLeague, and this is, you can't see it, but this is me. Guess when I die. That's right. He can be greedy. I die at 0%, I lose my stock, right? So I mean, why not just like take people's stock? Why isn't everyone just playing Luigi, who has a 0 to death combo kill, right? Because it's, even though this may be the most efficient way of finding a kill, it's not exactly the most common route. Even though you can find 0%, there's some games where you still have to play neutral, right? Or you still have to rely on other fundamental skills that are necessary. So even though they're not used all the time in a game, they're still fundamental for most games. Alright, so big question, how do we win, right? So there are 2 main laws of fighting games, and this is a video from Vermanubis. I would highly recommend you check out his channel. I'll post it in the description. I'll maybe chuck it in Learn to Play. This is something that Ernest clued me into, so props to Ernest for showing me this video initially. And it's asking what are fundamentals? And essentially, what he says, his main contention is that fundamentals in a vacuum, they're not very useful. You can tell a person, hey, you should improve your spacing. But what does that exactly mean? It doesn't mean much when you just say it like that. You'd have to explain, okay, maybe you're spacing things unsafely, maybe you should space it closer so you're actually hitting. And what he boils down to is something before fundamentals. They're 2 laws, right? Essentially the law of reactability and the law of punishment. And so I'll explain the two. First one, law of reactability here. And it's essentially saying there's always going to be options that you cannot react to. So the human body from a visual stimulus can react in about 0.25 seconds, and that's about 16 frames. And I'm sure if you've looked through frame data before, you've seen moves that come out very, very quickly. They come out in 9 frames, come out in less than that. Game & Watch's up B comes out in 3 frames. There are other options such as Witch Time, for example, that come out in 1 frame, right? Fox's Shine in Melee is a clear example of a 1 frame sort of thing. So the best thing we can do, we can't react to everything. We have to do the next best thing and try and predict what happens next. So I got some math out. I'm sure my friend Jackson would be happy to see this. So this is a form of logic that we can use to sort of describe how this law works. Yeah, he's pogging out in the chat. So if we look at the universe of discourse, or what we're talking about options of the fighting game, and the function dx is saying that the option x is just unreactable, right? And what we're saying here, essentially, in mathy terms, is there exists an option in a given fighting game that is just simply unreactable. Trent's asking what about the function dn? We'll get to that later, okay? But this is the logic that we're basing this law on. Fundamental logic. There has to be an option in a fighting game that we cannot react to, right? And so that begs the question again, what if everything could be reacted to, right? Think about that. And then also, what if nothing could be reacted to? Like, we just always have to guess. And so we can just chuck it on a reactability spectrum, right? You could have one side of the bar where everything is reactable to, and the other side where nothing is reactable. And so if everything is reactable and there are right and wrong answers, we can kind of just fit things into our leisure, right? And so this is what we see with kids playing, putting shapes in the blocks, right? In the right spaces. We see this in card games. This isn't to insult card games, but you get a lot more time to react to things, and there are still right or wrong answers. And it's not like card games don't have timers, right? They have like clocks, 60-second clocks, where you still have to make an important decision. Onto the scale of nothing is reactable, then you get a game like Scissors, Paper, and Rock, right? Or Rock, Paper, Scissors, or however you say it at home, where you kind of just have to guess. People have tried to manipulate humans. I know robots sort of read what you're going to do milliseconds beforehand, but if you're playing it fairly with a friend and you're not trying to trick them, then Scissors, Paper, Rock is a clear example of you just have to guess, right? And so we have Smash in the middle somewhere, where some things are clearly reactable, some things are just unreactable, right, by their very nature, right? And the best thing we can do, as I said before, is to just try and predict if that's going to happen later in the set. Alright, the law of punishment as well is the second law here. And for a given action, reactable or unreactable, it doesn't matter. There will always exist a corresponding action that can directly or indirectly punish someone doing that. So a direct punish is like actually hitting back. A counter like sort of embodies the law of punishment. You are doing a corresponding action to stop your opponent from attacking you. But there are also indirect punishes, right? You can just avoid the move, or you can shield it, or you can use that opportunity to get more space, or take your turn back, or just simply not die from a kill option, which is great. And back to math. I know you guys don't like math, but I mean, it's a good way of phrasing these concepts. We can say for all fighting game options, there exists another option that can punish it, right? And so we can manipulate this logic. What if we did the opposite, right? We could say, with the same universe, where if we say fxy is x can be punished by y, we say this, right? If you guys were paying attention, you might be able to decode this, but if you weren't, what this is saying is that there exists an option that for all other possible options, there is no punish available. Yeah, mathematicians work with this. Isn't that crazy? But what does this mean for the rest of the game, right? Well, if a character has an option that cannot be punishable, why aren't they just using it all the time, right? Even if it only dealt 1% and it almost never killed, they should just keep on using it over and over again. No counterplay would exist, right? I guess a move to try and imagine in your heads. Imagine if like Sephiroth could just like click his fingers and you all took 1%, right? And there's nothing you could do to stop it. You couldn't block it. You couldn't like spot dodge it. It was just always going to hit you. So no counterplay would exist. Everyone would play that character, and yeah, it wouldn't lead to a very fun game, right? It wouldn't lead to Smash as we know it. So back to the two laws. The reason why they are so powerful is because they work so well with each other. In terms of the law of reactability, not everything can be reacted to, and some things need to be punished preemptively, right? And that's what constitutes the fundamental of reads. The other way that it works, where we think about the law of punishment affecting reactability, is that you can't just have a single option that you do. Because once it becomes predictable, paradoxically, it becomes reactable. And so you need to have multiple options at the same time that threaten the similar spaces to try and get that all. And those are the traditional mix-up and reads. But essentially what the laws suggest is that there's risk in every single thing we do, right? Smash is inherently risky. No matter what option you pick, you're going to have to take a risk. And risks are okay, right? They are fundamental, right? And so if we consider what makes a good Fundies character, this was a list curated by Smash in 2018. It still holds true, I would say. A lot of these characters obey a lot of the laws, right? And they do it to a pretty high degree. With Mario, you get a lot of mix-up options. He's a good mix-up character, and he has some of the strongest punishes in the game. With Ike and Lucina, you can do a lot of safe things, right? But if you want to do a full proper punish, like you want to do like a nair that leads into more, you have to be spaced closer. Because if you try and space yourself all the time away as far as possible, you aren't going to get the maximum amount of value, right? Kirby's an interesting one because it's probably the lowest tier here. In traditional, I know I may be irking some of the audience, but I think he's just a very solid fundamentals character in the fact that you have to take risk, right? You're forced to take risk. You don't have a great aerial movement. You have to do things that are going to be inherently risky. And risk is part of the game. There's risk in everything we do. So if you have an emphasized risk, you can still work on mitigating all of that risk. And so how do fundamentals fit in with the laws, right? Well, as I mentioned right at the start of this JM lecture, the building block that we have is understanding the mechanics that define winning, which again is taking those 3 stocks before your opponent does, right? What comes next is the laws, right? And the law of reactability, the law of punishment. We still have to follow these in every fighting game we do, even though the game-specific rules are different. Right? So in Tekken, you can reduce someone's life bar, but you still have to take risk in everything you do, right? In Smash, you take stocks, and again, risk in everything you do in trying to take those stocks. Fundamentals fit in with laws in that they help the laws, right? You're trying to create fundamentals that work with the laws to get you that win condition. And then finally, you have techniques and sequences that make up those key fundamentals, right? And if you want more in-depth about what makes sequences, check out an earlier JM lecture that I also did that should also stay pretty relevant. All right, so you've got a whole list of fundamentals. You're probably thinking, what should I learn first, right? Because you have to pick one thing. You should probably learn that. And I would suggest thinking about it with a different framework. So the control framework is something that I came up with. Obviously, you can come up with your own frameworks, and I suggest that you do in ways that you already understand. But essentially, what you can say is that you can divide all fundamentals into 3 categories. What we control directly, what we can indirectly influence, and also what you have to be aware of you can't control whatsoever or influence. Alright, so the main things we can directly control are fairly obvious. I know it's obvious, but answering these obvious questions allow you to answer less obvious ones. So things like the control of your own character, how familiar you are with moving them around the stage, your hand-eye coordination and actually achieving that, even things like your mental capacity and your nerves as well. So how you deal with a win or a loss or a setback is completely up to you. There are strategies in place that you can figure out, and I do think having strong mental, or like mental for a tournament setting, is going to be a completely different fundamental than just playing friendlies, right? Or maybe playing a long set. As well as your vocabulary of mix-ups and situations. So again, this touches on the sequences lecture I did, but there are different ways to try and up your vocabulary on how you play the game. You can try and look at a certain move you've got and try and push its limits, see its use cases, see if you can use it differently. You can try and come up with a different set of sequences by mashing them together. But that still solely lies on you. That's the main theme of what we can directly control. Then there's things that we can influence, and these are more nebulous concepts, but they're constantly touted. Because they're so nebulous and they're so deep, people suggest you try and learn them first, which is something I don't necessarily agree with, because they're also one of the hardest things to learn. So again, there's another set. So ledge trapping, clear example. Spacing, yep. So prior to this, Trent was holding the ledge really, really close, and then he had to jump back and fair to try and catch Ash coming in. Conditioning, a classic one. Specifically operant conditioning. The other conditioning is like physiological body responses only. So this is a good way to catch people to try and get in your wavelength. But again, like I said, it's quite hard because every opponent is going to be different. And some people are susceptible to conditioning, some people aren't, but the main factor is that they're all susceptible to laws. They all still need to take risks in what they do. Alright, and what you can be aware of, right? So typically, everything that's present in the game that you can't control nor can you influence, they're just there, and you're just gonna have to learn them, right? This is a knowledge check, right? So one thing to be aware of is what the current status of the game is right now, right? So what's my percentage? What do I think the players want? Understanding the timer and the idea that like you only have a limited amount of time to play this game. The onus is actually a classic one, and probably something that should be for another JM lecture. But essentially, if you're down stocks, then you have to be aware that you need to make a move, because again, by the game mechanics, you have to try and get that advantage. Otherwise, you just lose by default. Right? Stage layouts. People say they hate Lilat. Learn how to love Lilat. I used to hate Battlefield until Jonas suggested I just leave my quick play on Battlefield only, and so I had to learn to love Battlefield too. DI and SCI for common moves. So JML had a history of not knowing how to DI Bowser side B, and that was rough. So if you're watching right now, it is down and in, and see how long you live from that. Last one is frame data. So not only knowing your character's frame data, but also the universal frame data. For example, shielding is 1 frame, and getting out of shield traditionally is 11 frames. So just knowing the basics from there would also be very good. And so now we can prioritize via this control framework, right? So when you make a misplay or you want to analyze your own gameplay, from a fundamental point of view, you should ask, was it something that I should have been able to control? Did I just move my character incorrectly? Did I have full agency in this situation and just did something wrong? Was my mental off? In terms of influencing, did I do this thing like several times before and I influenced my opponent to watch out for it and catch it? Can I use this later to influence my next action, right? Maybe you already have the punish for what you've done stored up, and you can start to play that level up game that Smash is known for. And lastly, was my mistake something that I should have known about, right? I should have known how to DI side B, right? Because all this information is there, and it's something that you can't really intuit. You just have to figure out and find the information later. And of course, this is my own framework. I would suggest you try and use this for anything you analyze, and try and come up with your own frameworks to analyze things. what I like about this is it's fairly exhaustive. You put everything into one of these 3 buckets. But ultimately remember that what you're doing here in terms of fundamentals are going to serve the laws that I stated previously, right? And by definition, those laws support the win condition, right? All right, coming up about 30 minutes, but just to quickly recap, the main goal of competitive Smash is to just win, right? Take those 3 stocks before your opponent does. You can do it in any way, as I showed. You can follow through the traditional way of racking up percent into leading to a kill. But the straightforward way, and probably the most common way, is you're going to have to rely on your fundamentals. Recap the 2 laws, law of reactability. There are some things you just cannot react to, so you're going to have to predict it. As well as everything can be punished, and that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you view it. I mean, there's always inherent risks to everything we do. And then fundamentals serve the laws, and then the laws serve the win condition, right? Obviously, there are other ways to think about Smash. Definitions are a funny thing, and this is one way that you can define fundamentals. But I do hope that this is a good jumping off point. And yeah, just gonna chuck it off to Q&A right now, and we'll probably discuss what's happening for JM Lectures in the near future. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, so if you have a question, you can unmute your mic
Connor, do you have a question?
and send it.
I do.
Okay, cool.
Oh,
Yes. So, can I go?
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So my
go
question
ahead.
is basically, what about characters who don't rely on fundamentals as much as others? Like, I guess, for example, Steve or Min Min. Like characters who have a very different way of playing the game than just pure fundamentals. Like, would it be very important for them to learn regular fundamentals as part of their win condition?
I definitely think so. So the 2 characters you mentioned, Min Min and Steve, we traditionally call them zoners. And even people like rag on zoners for not having to play the game like everybody else, but they're still playing a different. They're still playing the game just a little bit differently. They still have their own like troubles and issues, right? So if your character is trying to get in on them and you're a particularly fast character, they still need to predict on how you're going to go in, right? And of course they've got all that data from how you've tried to go in into the past. And their risk is backloaded into the fact that maybe you're not going to find a kill. You're just going to send them into disadvantage first. But they still have to play like a fundamentals game just as much as any other character, right? Or those traditional characters you saw like Mario or Lucina. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I still think learning the fundamentals is important. Even if you don't use it as your own character, you would at least understand how your opponent is influenced and how they leverage their own fundamentals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Good question. I like it.
I got a question.
Yep.
The term like fundamentals is like kind of like a broad thing. Like,
Mhm.
what are some examples of things that like are in the game that are important, but like do not count under the umbrella term as fundamentals?
So this may be controversial, but I think if we think of the other definitions that are more concrete, like win condition, if we're doing something that doesn't support our win condition, then it's not fundamental.
Okay,
All right.
I do.
So,
I think I like that.
right. It's all fundamentals as always has been. Right. So you can call taunting. You could like finagle taunting into a fundamental because you're affecting their mental and you win off mental. But the vast majority of players are either not affected by taunting or they're not going to consider taunting as a concrete way of winning. Right? And again, if we had a look at that dictionary definition, if I scroll all the way back, probably find it. Gives a very general list that I think everyone can agree upon, and like fundamentals are going to be slightly different to everyone involved.
I guess maybe it's more of a matter of not what isn't fundamentals, but
Mm.
like how important they are, like how weighted they are in getting
Yeah, in
towards a
the
win
in the
condition.
current game plan, yeah.
Yeah, because like there's definitely more niche things that you can experiment with, like specific text and stuff, but that's not like as fundamental as just say like bread and butters and whatever.
Yeah, that is a good way of putting it in terms of putting it into instead of a discrete scale of saying this is a fundamental and this is not a fundamental. You can also say this is really important to my game plan, right? And this is staying as a fundamental, or this I don't have to consider. It's not going to be a fundamental, or even statements like this is something I haven't considered before, but now that I realize the value of it, I should consider it, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
How do you think the concept of a character's game plan interacts with fundamentals?
So I would say by definition, at least from here, many people would think that fundamentals are agnostic or they should be mutually exclusive to a character in that you can carry over good fundamentals to not only any character you play, but any game you play. But what I would argue from the previous diagram is that you can build techniques and sequences that end up being part of your fundamental repertoire. And it's picking and choosing between that set or having like a large range or being very consistent with it, all those variables that are considered fundamentals, which again affect those laws and affect the win condition.
Right. So would you say that the game plan is like the next step up the pyramid, where like you use the fundamentals as or to build techniques and sequences, and then you use techniques and sequences to build a game plan?
I
Is
think
that
that's one way of putting it, yeah.
okay?
I think
That's
game plan is also just another bag of worms because whilst we tell people to build game plans initially, we see a lot of pro players almost seemingly have like decentralized game plans where it doesn't look like they're following any sort of script. And that's probably a topic for another time, but it's almost as if they've either built such a complex game plan that an outsider can't decipher it, or like they've transcended the game plan. They don't need it anymore. Could the build pyramid work backwards sequences to build fundies? Yeah, I think that's what Jonas was touching upon as well. So maybe this diagram, again, this is part of the discussion, maybe this diagram does need some work. But I do appreciate the input very much because it's making me think about it too. What's the best way to approach a matchup you're not used to or haven't played before? So I know from Ernest's experience and from how I might try and do things is I'd look at the character. I'd try and find a top player and see what they're doing with the character. And if it's try and see what comes up again and again and again. And you can build plans to try and punish that. What is underrated is actually having the muscle memory to do that. So knowing something is all well and good, right up until you're playing that game, you got nerves because you don't really know the matchup, and you're just trying to remember everything. So I would also recommend hopping into training mode and shadow boxing and practicing that specific punish. It's also worth mentioning that you might not be playing a top player. They may have their own ways of doing things. So one of the nice things we have JML is you can actually view the VODs of previous players, and we'll typically have a database on them. But at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. And yeah, again, that's just going to be a fact of the game. Sometimes you just have to view this as a learning experience. Again, I would recommend viewing how to analyze and using a framework to analyze your decisions as well. Does that answer your question, Spooky? Alright, cool.
Just to add on with Spooky's question,
Mm-hmm.
the way that so suppose like I don't have the time and I want to just figure out what to do with a matchup in game. So like, if I like go on to quick play, for example, and I match up against the duck hunt
Yeah.
or a me gunner, right? How do I approach that matchup, right? So the way that I think about it is I try and play a like safer game, right? Which is like, kind of what everyone does at the start of the game. At the start of game one, you don't just like start committing and doing everything. You try to play low risk. And while you're doing that, you identify the techniques. And so like going back to the pyramid diagram, I look at the techniques and the sequences that are on the screen. So like say it's an Ike landing with Nair on shield, for example. That's a technique. And then I try and I think about it in terms of the two laws. So like, is it reactable? Is it punishable? All right. And then basically, if I think that, oh, this is not punishable, then I just decide to myself, okay, don't try to punish it. And then if I think it is punishable, then I do try to punish it. Or like then I start brainstorming ways to punish it, right? It's mostly about the law. Like I do think of it more in terms of the second of these two laws being the law of punishment, where like technically the law is like everything is punishable, but you have to apply it to your own knowledge base of your character and think, how can I punish it for the purposes of like practical gameplay, right? Because even if everything is technically punishable, you still need to have your own way of punishing it, and that's a huge deal. Where I feel like people are very stubborn, or like it's a common like lower level thing where like you think you can punish something and you don't recognize that you can't. Whether it's because you're not fully aware of what the situation is like. Maybe it's like a frame data thing, or maybe it's because you don't like your character doesn't have the tools to punish this, or maybe your character, or maybe you just don't have the tech skill to punish this, right? You have to find a solution that works for you, I suppose, like that fits your skill set, and then work from there.
I would agree with that. And to add on, if you wanted to incorporate the law of reactability, you could take it one step further, and that maybe Nair isn't reactable to you, but the jumping that is necessary to Nair, right, is reactable, right? And so you can shift on what you react to, and instead of having to think, is he going to land with all of these options, you can start to narrow down the possibilities, right? And so you can say, all right, he's naired 50 times in a row and he's jumped. What do I think he's going to do, right? And so you can incorporate that, both the reactability and then sort of backload that punishment that you've already figured out.
Jacob,
Yes.
I have a question.
All right.
So we mentioned mix-ups and
Mhm.
reads, how they kind of
We did.
interplay within each other. Of
Mhm.
like, well, yeah, like it says on the screen. Like sometimes you got to be preemptive, and sometimes you just gotta like try and like react, I guess, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes there are like unfavorable reads or like mix-ups that a person may not want to play given the opportunity, right? Like maybe someone's only teched right like only once and you're like, fuck it, let's go. So I guess what degree do you think a person, now maybe very like personal, this degree, but like when do you think a person should commit to like a mix up or a read where they should feel comfortable wanting to win it? Alternatively, when should they not commit to that? Like how low is the bar? You know what I mean? Like how
Before
unfavorable
you
does that
start mixing up.
before you start mixing up or trying to read? Yeah.
I would agree with you that it is a personal question, and you can do whatever you want as long as you understand that there's a risk in shooting too early, right? There's a greater reward in punishing them, right? If you punish them super early on into the match, you don't have to wait for like 2 or 3 more interactions. But there's also a risk in that they stay to their habits. And I guess that's more so a read on the type of player that person is. I would say that if you're at a lower level of JML or just any competitive scene, you're probably going to rely on the habits that you've already built up. And so the read is they're going to do the same thing. If you're at a higher level, then it's going to be the opposite. I'm going to say maybe he's already clued in to the fact and he's going to roll the other way. And then you get that other level where it's like, you know, they're a top level player and then they still do the lower level player thing. But from good friend Ernest, what he would say is that people are dumb, and so you should just try and punish the same thing. And to a degree, I would agree with him. So I know it's not really an answer that's really definitive. I know I kind of gave a it depends sort of answer. But it really just does depend on your willingness to risk it. Would you call that a satisfactory answer, Connor? What are your thoughts?
I would
Because I'm sure you've thought about this before.
I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
I would also ask, do we have any other questions, fellas? Oh my gosh.
I've got kind of another one. So one of the things you mentioned before was like, everything's risky in Smash, or it's right here. Yeah, there's risk in everything right there. So what's the risk in staying away from your opponent so that they can't actually threaten you with anything?
I would assume that the risk is that they compensate for not being able to try and reach you and go for a risky option where they predict where you're going to go next. So, for example, overshooting. If you always are like backdashing away, they can just try and take all that space and punish you for that. If you're always shielding, a lot of characters have inbuilt ways to punish shielding, or they can do the classic wait because they have their turn still and you have to wait normally 10 frames, 11 frames before you can do anything. Or they can just shield poke you. If, again, back to the idea of punishment, if there was an option that was always going to win you the game, then we would have already devolved it down into that point.
Right. So in other words, the threat, I guess, is like what they're going to do, or the risk you do is how they're going to position themselves to try and, I guess, deal with your defensive option.
Yeah. And again, I think it's valid to say that, like, things look impossible to punish on the surface. but I would say that everything is counterplay, is what the law says.
Right.
If I
You
may
need to spend. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Connor.
also chime in, you had a slide earlier about like direct and indirect, like
Mhm.
punishment, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it also chimes into what a risk is, because you may
Mhm.
lose stage control, which is like, you know, you're not losing anything directly, but you're actually putting yourself in an increased risk of like losing the next mix up, for example, right? Because you're at a like disadvantageous position already, right? So the risk may not occur at the interaction, but maybe at the next interaction and so on.
I would agree with that. That you can't just keep running away forever, because little by little you're being punished for it.
Yeah. Good way of thinking about it.
I think when I first heard these laws, I was in disbelief. When Ernest first introduced me to these laws, I was like, there has to be more laws. But I think this set is pretty. It covers pretty much everything. And you could probably come up with a different set of laws that covers everything, but these having two is pretty concise.
But yeah, if no one else has any other
Yeah.
questions,
Spoonie had a question. Missed the first bit of lecture, but was the line between reads and mix-ups blurred? So they're both integral to the game, right? Because of the laws, right? And that's why we've built fundamentals. Those are the two fundamentals, reads and mix-ups, that probably most directly target the concept of the laws. So I'd call them distinct. Like, you can put a read into your mix-up, and you can read a mix-up, right? But I still think they're two distinct concepts. How come Smash players think a raw backer is normal and then get scared of a quarter circle? I think I was thinking about this the other day, in that a lot of fighting games typically have a very digital sort of motion for their character movement. Like, you just double tap most of the time. If you want to run, or if you want to do like an 8-way dash, you have to position yourself with the control stick. Whereas Smash is so based on analog control, and the idea that there are times when you don't want to move the stick full tilt. Not even in just like niche cases like walking, if you tilt with the left stick, but also if you want to like space yourself properly. And like, the mechanics do change what the fundamentals or what the skills are for the game, but it probably doesn't fit with the current definition of what people already think fundamentals are. They're just some food for thought. I addressed it because I thought it was something I was thinking about, right? Yeah, but if you have any other questions, I'll be sticking around. Probably just have a chill JML potty sesh afterwards.
yeah,
Yeah, sounds
I
good.
think we can wrap it up there. But
I
yeah,
think we can. Hey, you know what? Thanks for listening. Probably talk about what's gonna happen next. So I want to try and run JMLectures every 2 weeks. So this is week 4. We'll run one on the 6th week. Where are we? Right up front. Yeah, we were thinking of running macro versus micro. Thanks, Connor. Yeah. Yeah, running macro and micro. And Connor, did you want to run that?
yeah. So I'll probably have a run at that. But also, we're going to be shifting to a offline format. The meme is true. Having offline lectures post COVID, we wouldn't try and do it. Instead of just sitting in a Discord call like we are now, and be in an actual lecture theatre, booked out and everything. So if that sounds good to you guys, please let us know. And if you have any other topics that sound interesting, or you have questions about, or you want more understanding in, please let us know. And hopefully we can do this as a more regular thing, and spread the good word.
Woo!
But yeah, that's it.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. Yeah, that's it.